Engines roared through the black void like thunder trapped in a steel throat. Emergency klaxons bled red across the corridor walls. Broken sunlight stuttered through a shattered viewport, throwing white shards across the floor like a spill of stars. Somewhere beyond the hull, a dying carrier spun in slow, majestic pain, venting a comet's long silver breath. The human moved through it all with measured steps. His name was Jonah Vale, veteran, shuttle pilot, the kind who knew what fear was and kept it folded in his chest like a well-used map. As he rounded a corner, heat hit him, hot, chemical, angry, and someone shoved a crying child into his arms. An engineer shouted over the alarms, "Take her to Dock 6, please. No rank, no orders, just need." Jonah nodded once, quick and sure. "I've got her." He ran past crewmen dragging coolant lines, past a sheet of fire that licked the ceiling and bit down into wiring like a starving animal. He ran into a world where gravity hiccuped, lights strobed, and a warning voice repeated, "Hull integrity compromised. Evacuate, evacuate." Outside, the hunted hunter circled. They were called the Nairi Ascendancy, slender, silver, beautiful like knives under moonlight. Their ships fell out of folded space with the elegant certainty of falling leaves. They did not waste ammunition because waste was an insult to their god math. They did not spare enemies because mercy bent the curve of their perfect data. It was said they could listen to the vibes of an atom and know where it had wanted to go. It was said they could taste probability. And yet, for all their gleaming arithmetic, they kept a ritual older than their science. They hunted. They asked one question. "Why don't you run, human?" The voice came not through Jonah's helmet, but through the ship's broken bones. A harmonic, layered whisper that trembled in the metal of the hull and the bones of his ear. He didn't answer. Children did not need philosophy, they needed air. Dock 6 gaped ahead, a mouth rimmed with hazard lights. The docking bay held only 2 craft that could still launch. One a squat tugboat with more paint than pride. The other Jonah's shuttle, slender, scarred, faithful. He slid the child into a medic's arms and turned toward the shuttle, but an old woman caught his elbow. "Pilot," she said, eyes fierce. "Engines are gone on the tug. We need your shuttle to ferry 22 down to the station ring. It's pressurized there. It's safe." Safe. No word had been more bent in the last year. "Aye," Jonah said, "line him up. We'll make more than one trip." The station ring hung in the distance, a ghostly halo around the gas giant called Re-9. It was where merchants haggled and ships refueled, where the old came to feel gravity one last time and the young to leave it behind. Now it was a refuge lit by the cold glow of emergency grids, a wheel of light around a bruised planet. As the first group strapped in, Jonah strapped in too. He sealed the hatch, felt the shuttle shiver under his hands, and murmured, "Easy, girl, one more dance." He pushed off. The engines rose with a swelling hum, a choir note caught in his solar plexus. The shuttle slid free of the carrier's torn cradle and glided into the hard clarity of space. The Nairi hunter watched. Her name was Aelira, hunt-born, algorithm-chosen, eyes like 2 pieces of polished storm. She drew her awareness inward, feeling the drumbeat of her ship around her. She tasted the probabilities like rain. One human shuttle, 1,000 possible lines, some ended in fire, some in surrender. All of them were clean, elegant shapes on the black board. "Why don't you run, human?" she asked, because the question mattered, because in their traditions the answer had weight. Jonah heard the whisper again. He didn't reply. He threaded the shuttle through floating ribs of the carrier, slipped under a blinking buoy, and turned the nose toward the ring. In his rear display, a Nairi interdiction net unfurled, a web of correctional gravity that tugged at ships like tide pulls at a drowning swimmer. He lost a little speed. He didn't lose his gaze. The passengers felt the net's fingers as a low sickness. A child whimpered. A man vomited into his hands and wiped his mouth with the determination of someone who had been worse places. Jonah cut the grav by 3% to ease them. He felt Aelira's ship land like a thought in his wake. He keyed the general speaker. His voice went low, calm. "Strap in, heads down. When you feel us turn, that's me cheating the net. It'll feel like a hand on the back of your neck. It's just physics. I'm here." He cheated the net. He found a sweet spot at the edge of two opposing forces and danced there, nose yawing, tail sliding, the shuttle skating a slope that should not exist. The net gnashed at air, half grabbed, lost him again. He saw the ring, an illuminated wheel with a gap like a missing tooth. Section G had been hit earlier. He aimed for Section K. The shuttle's skin sang with acceleration. A lyra sharpened probability. She had hunted across 6 systems. She had watched predators on 1,000 worlds, lithe felines, pack-jaws, insect swarms, learn and fail and die. Humans learned like fire learns wood. It excited her. She closed the range and spoke again. "Why don't you run, human?" Jonah said out loud to his empty cockpit, "I am." He skimmed the ring's hull, matching its spin, and slotted the shuttle through a maintenance hatch like threading a needle in a hurricane. The docking clamps bit with an ugly clunk. Air hissed. The hatch cycled. He stood and his legs shook once and stopped shaking. He opened the hatch and turned into the cool, blue-lit corridor. Station volunteers were there to receive the evacuees. The old woman unbowed, squeezed his arm again. "You came back," she said, surprised. "Not yet," Jonah said. "One trip down, many to go." And he went back. The second trip was harder. The net was thicker. The Nairi ship closer. A Lyra's voice stalked his hull like static ghosts. The third trip was a knife blade through rain. The fourth, he lost a thruster grid for 8 seconds and had to reverse the shuttle by flipping orientation and burning a rear vent as a front engine. He laughed once, a short, unbelieving breath when that worked. The fifth trip, he looked down and his hands were steady. His heart was a simple drum. On the sixth, the voice came not as a threat but as a curiosity that sounded very nearly like respect. "Why don't you run, human?" This time he answered. "Because I'm the run," he said softly, and somehow the communication carried. "I'm the running you hear in their footsteps. I'm the door opening. I'm the engine note that tells a mother her child will live. Inside, you'll call it sentiment, but you know what it really is." A pause. Space has a way of making silence musical. A Lyra tilted her head. "What is it really?" "Design," Jonah said, "biology's most dangerous idea. We were designed by a world that tried to kill us with everything it had. We run toward each other, that's how we win." A Lyra's mouth pressed into a line that was not a smile and not a scowl. She placed her ship squarely in his path and opened her weapon arrays like a flower in bloom. The weapons were quiet as a held breath. Her voice wasn't. "Interesting," she said. "Prove it." He did. The Nairi were elegant. The station ring was not. It was a mess of brass bones and bolted plates and patched pipes, built by people who valued the difference between working and perfect. Jonah knew every bulkhead curve by the end of the 7th run. He knew the exact tremor the rig made when the west radiator expanded, the hiccup in the spin when Section G's missing tooth rolled past emptiness. He knew there was a fuel line you could hit with a magnetized clamp and steal 3 seconds of pressure gain. He stole 3 seconds. He used them to punch through the net again. On the 10th run, a Nairi frigate leaned out of fold and the carrier finally split in two like a ripe fruit. The sound came to Jonah as a soft crack over the comm, but it struck his brain the way a door slam hits a sleeping house. He flinched. Then he snarled in a voice nobody heard. He flew straight at the frigate's wake, let the turbulence buckle his wings to the edge of structural limits, then rode the upper edge of the slipstream like a leaf on a current. His shuttle threw off sparks like meteors. The hull sang. A Lyra paused inside the calculus and felt for the first time in a long time a prickle of something she later identified as admiration. Jonah docked. He stumbled when he stood. Someone offered him water. He drank, coughed, wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. He looked back toward the carrier wreck and imagined the names of those he couldn't save. He stuffed the names into the pocket of his chest with the folded map of fear. He sealed the hatch again. The 11th run turned into a chase. Aelira stopped speaking. She moved. Her ship shadowed his so closely their wakes braided like hair. She let his shuttle slip inside a knifed oval of gravity she held with graceful precision. She could crush him there. Instead, she studied the angle of his jaw, the tilt of his craft when he anticipated her gentle shoves. He adjusted his controls like a pianist shaping a chord. He did not flare the engines in panic. He breathed. He flared once exactly when her algorithm predicted a flare would be disastrous. It should have been. He made it beautiful. He spilled heat in a spiral pattern, let the net bite the spiral, and used the torque to roll the shuttle through a gap that did not exist until he made it. He whispered to the ship, "See, we can do anything together," and for a heartbeat believed she whispered back. He docked. He undocked. He ran. By the 14th run, the station ring began to feel less like a refuge and more like a heart-lung machine trying to keep a patient alive. Jewel spikes rippled up its ribs. Lights went dark in sections like blinking eyes about to close. The station master's voice, a tired woman with salt in her voice, came on tight and steady. "All hands, docking protocol red. All hands, brace for impact in section J. All hands." Impact came like a giant exhaling. Metal buckled down the corridor from Jonah's hatch. A child screamed. Someone began singing without realizing they had begun. Jonah knelt to ready a toddler's shoe because his hands needed to do something delicate before they did something cruel again. He stood, he went. The 17th run pissed off probability. A debris cloud blizzarded between shuttle and ring. Bright shrapnel, dim bodies, the long trailing metal ribbon of a broken antenna lashing space like a whip. Jonah flew into it because stopping was not an option. The shuttle's nose took a hit that cracked the external camera lens. The world slewed. Jonah flew blind except for a sliver of radar and the memory of thousands of previous seconds. He felt his way through the debris like a violinist memorizes the air. He breathed. He found the gap between two tumbling panels and slipped through side on. He didn't see the body, but he felt the soft thud, bowed his head once, and promised he would fix what he could by saving the living. Aelira was in the clouds with him. Her ship touched two fragments with perfect precision and turned them aside so they would not shred his hull. He did not know she had done it. He only knew his luck held in a way that felt less like luck and more like a hand beside his own. Before the 18th run, they spoke again. "Why don't you run?" Aelira asked, now less hunter than anthropologist at the edge of an answer. "You are outnumbered, your craft is inferior, your odds slope into the pit." Jonah glanced at the ring, at the gas giant, at the wide black sky where Earth was a memory so bright it hurt. "Because if I run," he said, "I'll be the only thing I save, and I'm not worth that much." The silence came soft as snowfall. Aelira had been taught this, that humans overvalued the group because their ancestors thrived in packs. But the theory did not carry the weight of the man in front of her, hands steady on ruined controls, voice simple. She had learned truths in math and truths in blood. This was a blood truth. She decided, in that cold spark of decision that felt like falling in love with a particular idea, to reframe the hunt, not slaughter, challenge, not kill, measure. The 19th run was the last Jonah could make on that engine. As he cut loose from the ring, the left manifold coughed and died, and the shuttle yawed into a spin. He fought it with thrusters and swearing and shame at the swear because children were aboard. He fought it and won, and the shuttle staggered toward the broken carrier to make one final pickup from a lifeboat tumbling end over end toward the planet's upper atmosphere. He kissed the hull with a docking clamp and swore at the clamp when it didn't want to bite. It bit. He reeled them in like fishermen reel storm-stupid fish. As he turned for home, a Nairi destroyer slid into space with the cold majesty of a glacier cutting a sea. Its belly opened. Aelira's breath hitched despite herself. She sent a tight narrow beam to the destroyer's master channel. "Hold. Admiral Silos of the Nairi did not honor hold. He honored doctrine. He released a spearfall 30 guided rods of dense metal, each one with a computer brain that knew exactly where a human heart might be now and 1 second and 2 seconds hence. 30 bright darts streaked toward the human shuttle. Aelira could not stop 30. She could stop 3. She could warn him of the rest. She did both. Down, she whispered into his instrument panel with a voice that did not tremble. Down in 3-2 now. Jonah slammed the shuttle into a shallow dive that flirted with the planet's kiss. Atmospheric particles sparked along the hull with a hiss like rain on a tin roof. The rods changed course to follow the heat bloom. Jonah killed heat by killing power. The shuttle fell, dead and bright. He counted. He felt. He relit the engine with a raw cough that was half miracle and half physics obeying a stubborn man. He pulled up. The rods overshot. Aelira peeled 2 away with gravity knives. The remaining 4 hit the place where he had been, not the place where he stubbornly refused to be. They screamed past and burned in the planet's upper air, and for a second the sky looked like it was bleeding sparks. Jonah climbed. He felt old. He docked. He slammed open the hatch and was drowned in hands. He was hauled out of his ship and pounded on the back and kissed on the cheek by strangers. He smiled once, quickly, and then the station's lighting hiccuped and went black and then returned 1 notch dimmer. The ring was dying. He put his hand on the hull of his shuttle as he would put it on the forehead of a feverish friend. He knew he would not launch again. He also knew the ring could not survive another pass of those spears. The destroyer would end this slow mercy with fast efficiency. Unless the ring fought back in a way it was never built to fight. He found the station master. We can turn the spin. She stared at him. What good does a wobble do? If I get you the aim, you can throw something. We have no guns. He pointed toward the neglected cargo mass drivers used to sling crates to small freighters. You have slings. Her eyes widened, brightened, and turned savage. Mass, velocity, a story as old as God. They went. The ring did not have soldiers in that moment. It had cooks and welders and teachers, and a man who tuned pianos in the promenade on Sundays. They became a battery crew in minutes. The volunteers dragged containers of scrap to the driver rails. A teenager with a face like a sunrise learned to arm the release mechanism. The old woman from the shuttle runs limped onto the deck and started taking notes, making columns, keeping order with a voice so firm it bent chaos into compliance. Aelira watched. If she spoke now, the admiral would cut her channel. If she moved to help again, he would notice. She hovered within her own power, holding that power still. The destroyer adjusted its belly door like a mouth ready to spit. Jonah stepped toward a maintenance console, ran code with fingers that had once built model rockets in Mississippi sunlight, and coaxed the ring into a shimmy. Not enough to break it, just enough to make the destroyer's aim slip. He felt the ring protest. He whispered apology. I know. He whispered to his bones the way his father had whispered on long drives. 1 more mile. He fed the mass driver coordinates like prayers. Fire, he said. Scrap screamed along rails and leapt into space. Rusted beams, old plating. The snapped-off spine of a sign that once read "We sell," now open, words turned weapons. The first volley hit nothing, but the second hit a spear as it left the destroyer and knocked it into the ship's own belly. It burst, tiny but loud in ego. The third volley wasn't aimed at weapons. It was aimed in front of the destroyer's path, a cloud of garbage that became, with the right timing and the wrong pride, a wall. The destroyer plowed into trash and humiliation. It did not break, but it slowed. And when it slowed, the ring gained a second. And when the ring gained a second, it lived 1 second longer. And 1 second is enough time for 1,000 things to happen, including a miracle. Jonah stood at the console and made a choice that looked small from space and enormous from inside his chest. He opened a panel beside him and ripped 3 safeguards from a battery bank that powered Section H's gravity. Power surged. Lights flared. The rails screamed like they were giving birth. The mast driver threw a container full of iron like a curse. It hit the destroyer's belly and dented it like a thrown rock dents a cathedral door. No real damage, deep insult. The admiral's voice rolled out across the net, cold as a scalpel. Erase them. Aelira moved, not to help, to block. Her sleek hunter slid, not in front of the ring, not in front of the destroyer, but into a thin thread of space where all the future lines converged into a knot. She hung there like a pearl on a string. Her status light blinked. She sent one word to the admiral. Observe. It was a dare wrapped in doctrine. They worshipped observation. They would not refuse. Jonah's console hissed and spat heat up his wrists. He smelled copper. He looked to his left and saw the old woman, one hand on a railing, one hand passing ammunition to a boy with eyes like planets. He looked to his right and saw the child whose shoe he had tied hold her mother's hand as if she had discovered the equation for stability. He looked up and saw the gas giant's thin auroras ripple like silk. He felt fear. He folded it. He put it away. He whispered one more apology to the ring he was about to ask too much of. He fed power from the outer habitats into the rail core. Gravity hiccuped, people stumbled. Someone cursed, then laughed. The ring shook itself like a horse shaking off flies. Metal groaned, and the sound turned into a chord that hung in the air, strange and beautiful and terrible. He aimed, he fired. The last container did not hit the destroyer. It hit nothing. It went. It kept going. It tore through the admiral's predictive field like a hot knife through party cloth and made a hole in certainty. Unbothered by the wrongness of its own numbers, the container passed the destroyer and sailed into the Nairi net. The net took it badly. The container was not a weapon. It was a big, dumb brick, but it hit the harmonics just so and made the net flex at a frequency it did not like. The net flinched. It flickered. And when it flickered, for the first time since this began, a corridor opened in the gravity web, thin as joy, long as death. Aelira saw it. Jonah felt it. Go, Aelira said aloud, surprising herself with the rawness in her voice. Go now. Jonah didn't move. He looked at the evacuees on the deck. He looked at his broken shuttle. He looked at the ring. At the shy door the universe had accidentally left unlocked. He looked at the faces that had trusted his hands, and he smiled a tired, surprised smile. You go, he said, and this time the station master heard and understood the shape of his refusal. She shook her head once violently. No, we all go. Jonah set his jaw. Somebody has to keep the door from slamming. He turned to the battery bank again. He rolled his sleeves like a man about to wash dishes. He began to sing under his breath, an old earth tune his grandmother used to hum while she beat eggs with a fork. The ring's power graph climbed toward a place the graph maker had never dreamed of. He turned the spin one fraction more. He listened to the station creak like a ship creaks when it climbs a wave and pretends it's not afraid. He heard footsteps behind him. Dozens. Then hundreds, welders, cooks, teachers, the piano man, the old woman, the teenager with the sunrise face, the child with the tied shoe. They took positions along the rails and the power feeds and the manual cranks and the vents that needed coaxing and the doors that needed holding. The ring was a dying thing. It had never been more alive. On my mark, Jonah said, and didn't need to raise his voice. The ring was listening. Mark. They fired everything. Light poured along the rails like rivers of bright water. Containers leapt into space. Scraps sang. The ring shook so hard that 1,000 dust motes took flight and glittered in the air like tiny galaxies. The destroyer reeled, metaphorically if not physically. The admiral said nothing because doctrine had run out of words. Aelira held her place in the knot and felt her entire people lean forward in their seats in distant rooms, unable to look away from one human who would not run. The corridor in the net widened to the width of a prayer. The station master pointed. Freighters. Go. They went. Engines howling, hulls trembling, passengers screaming and then laughing and then weeping. A courier. A garbage scow with an engine too good for its body. A mining rig that looked like a rusted insect hauling families in its dust bays. They went, and behind them the corridor began to close, and Jonah took hold of the rails with his own hands as if he could hold open the universe with tendon and will. Aelira watched, and something tore inside her. Not loyalty, not doctrine, something raw and private and violent as the will to breathe. She cut her own engines and let her ship drift a little, just enough to adjust the threads. The Admiral would see it later and call it an anomaly. He would add it to her record with a red mark. She didn't care. She had to see what happened when a door met a man. The last freighter shuddered past. The corridor pinched. The net woke all the way. The destroyer's belly opened again with the finality of a judge's gavel. Jonah turned from the rails. He was pale. He was smiling like a man whose favorite song just finished. He walked back to his shuttle and ran his hand along her hull one last time. He did not get in. He just touched her. He turned. He looked at the people he had helped save. He lifted a hand to the child whose shoe he had tied. She lifted a hand back. "Why don't you run?" The voice asked him one last time, softer and not entirely Nairi. He looked up toward that silver, hovering beauty. He spoke in a voice worn thin and clean. "Because I am the run," he said, and then his mouth twisted into something like mischief, like victory. "And because you asked." He stepped back to the console and did a stupid, beautiful thing. He bled all remaining charge from his section into a pulse through the mass driver rails. Not a projectile, a wave. It rolled into the net not as weight, but as suggestion. It said, "If you were open just a little longer," and the net, which loved elegance, considered the elegance of permission and flickered one last time for the sake of symmetry. Aelira inhaled sharply. The pulse burned Jonah from the inside out, gently like a sunburn across the soul. He swayed, but the old woman's hand was under his elbow without asking. He didn't fall. He watched the last battered barge slip away through a door he had held open with the last of his life. The destroyer fired. It did not fire spears. It fired a clean, beautiful beam that meant to cut the ring like a wedding ring can cut flesh if it catches on machinery. The beam lanced out with geometric grace. Aelira moved. Not to stop it. She couldn't. To witness. To place herself in the line between hunter and hunted. Answer a question she had asked and never really heard answered. The beam carved light across the ring, and the ring burned, and then something happened that even doctrine has to write down with humility. The gas giant breathed. Not air but field, the high, thin exhalation of a magnetosphere touched by too many ugly toys. The aurora above Re-9 surged and spilled and became a bright river that kissed the ring's hull. The beam hit the river. The river sang. The beam attenuated, wavered, broke into a million shimmering threads, and those threads went everywhere, harmless as the light through a summer tree. Jonah laughed, the laugh of a man who had bet on a storm and won. He had counted on the ring's field and the planet's temper, and the moment when the equation would finally feel like a prayer because he had tuned it so by hand. The destroyer pulled back. Doctrine whispered retreat and regroup and ruin them later. The Admiral listened to Doctrine because Doctrine had never failed him, and because he had never met a human like Jonah up close. He turned his beautiful ship with beautiful fury and slid into fold space and was gone. Aelira did not go. She eased closer to the ring on thrusters as gentle as fingertips. Her ship hovered outside the battered dock. Emergency beacons stuttered an exhausted hello. She did not ask permission. She opened a channel. Jonah stood in a corridor lit by leftover lightning and looked into a face he had only known as a threat. She was unearthly and young and ancient, like a myth told on a night train. He felt absurdly the urge to offer her coffee. She looked at him, at the scar on his cheek he had gotten when he was 8, at the burn on his wrist from 10 minutes ago, at the way his shoulders had squared despite exhaustion when he saw her. She searched for fear. She found a strange absence where fear should be, a hollow full of other people's names. "Why did you not run?" She asked again, not because she needed the answer now, but because she wanted to hear it in the voice that had answered the universe with a human shape. Jonah lifted his chin. The words came like an old oath he had worn smooth by saying it silently 100,000 times. He kept them simple because truth hates ornament. "I did," he said. "I ran toward them." She felt speechless in a way she had never been. Her people's language had 47 words for clever and only one for this feeling. It was not reverence. It was not shame. It was the tiny ache of a shift in gravity when a planet you thought you knew adds a moon. Aelira closed her eyes and opened them again. "I will report," she said slowly, each word chosen like a star chosen for a map. "I will report the equation as I saw it. A man without shield turned a station into a sling. A ring became a heart. A predator became a witness. I will report that you ran toward your fire. A pause, tiny, enormous. And next time we will not ask you to run." Jonah nodded. The old woman leaned up to his ear and whispered, "Ask her for coffee." He smiled, conflicting emotions running across his face like clouds. "You ever taste coffee?" he asked the empty air, half to her, half to himself, half to the memory of Earth. "We make it from a seed that looks like a mistake. We burn it a little and then pour water through the ashes, and what comes out tastes like mornings learned by heart." Aelira considered this with the seriousness it deserved. "We have infusion. It tastes like permission," she said, the closest she could come to poetry without breaking doctrine entirely. "Maybe we will trade one day." "Maybe," Jonah said and heard, in the space behind that word, the beginning of a bridge. The ring's light steadied. Someone started the singing again. This time it was not a frightened song, but a weary, bright thing that sounded like hammer on nail and wind on grass. The teenager with the sunrise face leaned against a bulkhead and fell asleep, smiling in a way that would break 1,000 hearts if anyone saw it closely enough. The piano man looked at his hands as if wondering whether he still remembered C major. The child with the tied shoe lifted her foot in silent triumph. Aelira's ship backed away. Her face remained on the screen, then flickered and was gone. In the sudden quiet, Jonah swayed. The old woman's arm was around him again. Where had she come from? Always from exactly where she needed to be. He looked out through a cracked viewport. The gas giant breathed light. The ring turned one more time. Far beyond, in the direction of home, a space that had been empty now held the faintest smear of ships moving into somewhere that was not safety but was closer than this. He closed his eyes and saw oceans. He opened them and saw steel. He felt tired enough to sleep for a year and awake enough to count every star. He whispered to no one and to everyone, "Next time I'll bring coffee." The station master came to stand beside him. Her voice was hoarse. "You know you rewrote the safety manual for 3 species tonight." He shrugged a shoulder and winced. "We can stitch it back together." She nodded. "We will." Jonah turned to go toward the medbay, toward the engineers, toward the piano he hoped was still in tune when a small hand tugged his sleeve. The child with the tied shoe looked up at him with a seriousness that would make admirals weep. "You didn't run," she said. He knelt, bones creaking, and met her gaze level with his. "I did," he said gently, "but I ran like this." He turned and pointed to the ring, to the people, to the space where ships had gone, to the quiet corridors and the loud hearts. "I ran toward." She considered this, nodded solemnly as if accepting a theorem, and then yawned so big her eyes vanished. Her mother scooped her up. Jonah grinned up at the mother, and it felt like being alive. After the last triage bandage was tied, after the last container was wedged under the last failing brace to hold it for one more hour, after the last engineering miracle of the night was sighed into being, Jonah found a patch of wall and leaned on it. He gazed out at Aelira's shrinking ship, a silver fish against a sea of black silk. He raised 2 fingers in a small salute. In her cockpit, alone, Aelira touched her lips with her fingertips in an old, private sign of respect. She whispered in her own language something that meant, "New data has a taste." Then she turned her ship and vanished into fold space, not to flee, but to carry a story to a table where stories do not often sit. The ring creaked. The gas giant breathed. The survivors slept. Jonah did not. He stood with the weight of quiet on his shoulders, and for the first time since the first alarm, he allowed himself to hear his own heartbeat. He did not know what tomorrow would be. He knew only this: the corridor had closed, but a different kind of door had opened. The kind with hinges oiled by actions instead of arguments. The kind that leads to unexpected tables and strange infusions and maps with new borders drawn in pencil. The shipwrights would write the story in metal. The singers would write it in sound. The children would draw it with chalk on a floor. A circle, a door, a hand. The Nairi would write it in report language that could not hold its heat. Aelira would write it in the margins. And somewhere on a blue world far away, a coffee kettle would whistle. Jonah Vale straightened, breath fogging in the cold of a failing vent, and smiled. Not a warrior's smile, not a saint's, a human's. The smile of someone who had chosen a direction and kept walking. Behind him, in the hush, the old woman said softly, to herself and to the air and to the universe that had paused to listen, "Why don't you run, human?" Jonah didn't hear her. He was already moving because there was more to fix, more to hold, more to lift. There always is. And that day the galaxy learned humanity doesn't conquer, it endures.